Hello, welcome to Talking Point on Global Business. And we told you earlier on in the program that we're looking at the 13% derivation fund injection into 4 Niger Delta states. And to talk with us is the Executive Director of Policy Alert, a civil society group based in Uyo, but its jurisdiction is Nigeria. Trust me on that. So Tijah Bolton-Akpan is our guest today. Thank you very much for joining us on the program, Tijah. Now, let's go straight into the issue. There's the issue of the 13% derivation account, derivation funds, and a court process which the states actually won against the federal government. Could you give us a background to all this?
Okay, thank you. So, a few years ago, the state governments, given the reduction in oil revenue flows to their coffers, felt that the central coffer was shortchanging them, especially with regards to production sharing contracts. So they decided to approach the Supreme Court, for a decision on that. Now, as a background, the Production Sharing Contract Act of 1993 provided that any time oil revenues went beyond $20 per barrel or 15 years after the enactment of that act, that the fiscal terms needed to be changed. But given the way things are done in Nigeria, those fiscal terms remained that way for so many years. Now, what that meant was that Nigerian government, that is the government of the Federation, was losing billions of dollars over the years because of the failure to review the fiscal terms on production sharing contracts. Now, given that this is just a pot that federal government takes the money on behalf of the Federation, puts it there, and based on the Section 162 of the Constitution, has to share it further to the different tiers of government. So the state governments felt that they had been shortchanged, especially the governments that depend on 13% derivation, those oil-producing states. So they had to ask the Supreme Court, to decide on this. And they got a favorable decision from the Supreme Court on this. And in 2018, it was decided that the federal government should reclaim those outstanding revenues that should have been paid from production sharing contracts over the past 20-something years, over 20 years or so. Now, what that meant was that these states stood to get some sudden injection, of massive revenues into their coffers. The state governments, the federal government proceeded, to enter these negotiations with the oil companies without recourse to the states, as the Supreme Court decision had provided. And the states felt aggrieved about this and went again to the courts to get a further decision that the courts now ordered that the federal government should actually pay these monies. In fact, it came to over close to 6 trillion if you add up, the 4 states that benefited from those series of decisions. So we had Bayelsa State getting 951 billion, Delta State getting 1.6 trillion, Akwa Ibom getting 2.3 trillion, and Rivers getting 1.1 trillion. Now, when you compare, look at the revenue profile of these states, you realize that this is a sudden injection of funds. This is going to be a transformative moment for them if these revenues are put to judicious use. So for us, we felt that it is a very important moment in the fiscal life of the subnationals that are oil producing, because if these revenues are properly utilized, it's going to go a long way to reverse the trend of backwardness, of underdevelopment, environmental degradation, social anomy in those states.
Okay, sorry, let me stop you right there. Before we come to accountability of the states, is it only these 4 states that this court process affected? Because I know there are more oil-producing states, isn't it?
Well, I think it's still subject to the decision of the courts. For now, it is these 4 states that have approached the courts and they have got decisions in their favor. It is hoped that it's going to become a race to the top in some way, so that as the 4 states have gone and got success, other states will follow suit. For instance, Delta wasn't one of the states that approached the Supreme Court initially. And when they took the matter up, the Attorney General made the argument that they were not part of the initial case and as such could not get it. But it was decided in their favor still. So it is hoped that other states will follow suit, especially states that, because this is basically about the 13% derivation, especially states that have, that benefit from 13% derivation.
Okay, please, has the federal government actually released these funds? Because I know you say there has been approval to get the funds, but has the government released these funds to the state?
Yes and no. No, because we do not have, as of this moment, any evidence of those transfers from the center to the states. But yes, in the sense that it is possible for the states to write on the back of those judgments to begin to get some injections of funds into their, their coffers. Now, I'm going to explain. What we've seen in the past is that whenever opportunities like this present, states now jumpstart it, as it were, and approach commercial banks, for facilities, which they use in anticipation of the actual release of these funds. And that on its own is a huge fiscal risk for the states, because what that will do is that it is going to cancel out the potential effects that those funds would have had, on the development of these states. So one of the things we said recently, we put out a press release that the states should avoid the temptation of using the court judgments as a guarantee, for getting commercial bank loans. Because if you look at these states, they are already burdened in debt. Now, if you check as of March 31st of this year, if you check the top 10 indebted states in the country, 5 out of them are actually states that are states in the Niger Delta that are oil producing, collecting 13% derivation. In fact, if you add Lagos State, which is a recent entrant into that league of 13% derivation, it would mean that 6 out of those top 10 debtor states are actually 13% derivation earning states. And then if you also look at the general debt profile of the country, the states that are, these 4 states that are expecting the sudden injection of revenue, their debt profile constitutes 25% of the total debt of subnationals in the country. So this tells us that it is a very risky venture. There is a possibility that these states could hatch on the expectation of these injections of funds and further strangulate themselves, as it were, with a debt board.
Okay, well, forgive me for being critical here. Yes, we agree that you are very concerned about the mismanagement or possible mismanagement of those funds by the state. But do you have any proof that these states have mismanaged funds before? Because it could be that the states actually need the monies at this time to be injected.
Yes, so the proof is actually in the management of the 13% derivation over the years. So recently we saw reports saying that in the past 9 years, over 10 trillion has come into the region from 13% derivation. Now, what does this say? If you look at the socioeconomic indicators of these states, especially the oil-producing communities, it stands, a contradistinction with the volume, of resources entering those states. So what the Constitution failed to do, the section 162 subsection 2, which created the 13% derivation, was that it created a solution for the clamor of the Niger Delta states, but it also created, another problem in doing so, because it failed to state how these funds would be utilized. So out of the 9 Niger Delta states, for instance, only 5 of them have producing areas development commissions, which are statutory bodies, saddled with the responsibility of managing a part of the 13%. The rest just discretionally injects the 13% into their overall budget and spend it, as they want. So if we want to use the management of the 13% derivation by the state governments receiving it, then we can say that it leaves a huge, room for improvement. It leaves a lot to be desired. Now, look at also the evidence in terms of infrastructure, in these states. A lot of these states are really backward in terms of infrastructure. There's a huge, physical and social infrastructure gap. When people go into these places, they begin to wonder, is this really the region that is famed for, producing these kinds of resources on which the country depends? So there is a paradox, of poverty amidst plenty. And that's in itself shows that a lot has been found wanting with governance in those states. But I would specifically want to talk about even the budget management of these states. We recently did an analysis at Policy Alert, and we found that for 2020 budgets, actual expenditure, 8 out of the 9 states, with Akwa Ibom as the exception, had extra budgetary expenditure. In fact, for Rivers State, their capital expenditure was over 140% of the budget. That tells you something about the transparency, the accountability, of the states. Yes, we've had the state fiscal transparency, accountability, and sustainability program by the World Bank, which has given incentives to these governments to be more transparent. And we are seeing an increasing number of them putting out their fiscal documents out there in the public domain. That is good and commendable. But we still have some of them who feel that they are too big, to be brought under such strictures, like Rivers State, for instance, which the attitude around there is that we have so much money, so we don't need this World Bank grant. And if you check in the 2019 APAs, the performance assessment for SIFTAs, 3 states out of the 4 that got 0 grants were from the Niger Delta, receiving 13% derivation. That tells us something about their transparency and their readiness to reform. So this is actually, a concern.
Wow. Thank you very much, Tijah Bolton-Akpan, Executive Director of Policy Alert. We would have talked more. In fact, I really wish we could go more, especially concerning citizens' role in trying to put the government or make the government accountable for some of these funds. But I'm sure we'll do that next time. Thank you for joining us on the program Talking Point. For you, the program continues. Global business it is. Stay tuned.